The winch was already turning when I stepped outside with my coffee. My 1980 Bronco, orange original paint, parked 6 feet inside my own property line, was tilted up at the nose. A yellow strap cinched around the axle. Karen stood beside the truck in a bright hot pink blazer suit, gold necklace flashing above her clipboard, photographing my plate. "Maybe this time," said loud enough for the Petersons across the street to hear. "You'll learn the rules apply to you too. Leon's coming Monday. We've done it before." She slapped a fluorescent orange notice on the windshield of my Tahoe. Then she pointed at the tow truck's door at the logo painted there. "White on navy. Rizon Towing and Recovery. Licensed and bonded." "That truck right there," she said, smiling. "Works for us, not you. Get used to it." I looked at the truck. I looked at her. "I took a sip, I noticed," I said. She blinked. She'd expected an argument. She got 2 syllables and a coffee mug. Something in her posture tightened. She covered it with paperwork, tore a carbon copy of the violation, held it out at arm's length like she was feeding a stray. When I didn't take it, she set it on the Tahoe's hood and anchored it with a river rock from my own landscaping. The Bronco came up off the concrete with a metallic groan. The driver, Mike, still wouldn't turn around. 38 years old, father of 2, 9 years on my payroll. He knew exactly who was standing on the porch with the coffee mug. He was the only person on the cul-de-sac at that moment who knew, and he was not allowed to say a word. Karen kept reading from her clipboard like she was building a case for a federal grand jury. Oversized vehicle, non-conforming exterior color, parked at a non-perpendicular angle, visible mechanical components, out-of-state registration. Every one of them was wrong. I'd read the Cedar Hollow bylaws front to back the week I closed on the house. The Bronco was under the size limit. The color clause applied to exterior paint on residences, not vehicles. The angle clause applied to street parking, not driveways. The registration clause gave me 60 days. I transferred in 30. Visible mechanical components wasn't anywhere in the 82-page document. She'd invented half of them on the spot. I let her keep talking. She walked across my driveway, not the sidewalk, the driveway, and across my lawn to reach her car. The Petersons' blinds were already closed. Mrs. Calloway, 3 houses down, had stepped onto her porch when the tow truck pulled up and stepped back inside the moment Karen looked her direction. "Tahoe's next," Karen said over her shoulder. "Then the sedan. Then the van by Tuesday. You'll be walking to work, Mr. Hale. Unless you'd like to settle today. We accept checks." Mike strapped the Bronco down. He was taking his time. Too much time. Anyone else on any other call, he'd have been finished in 90 seconds. He was stalling. He took an extra minute on each tie down, avoided the scratch his hook had left on the bumper, glanced exactly once toward my porch, not at me at the doormat, and looked away. Karen didn't notice. She was photographing the Tahoe. 8 months, she said, half to me, half to her clipboard. 8 months you've been ignoring this neighborhood standards. People like you always think you're the exception. She finally looked me in the face. "You're not." The flatbed engine rumbled. Mike climbed in. He pulled away from the curb without his usual courtesy honk. The Bronco. My father's Bronco, the one he'd bought new the year I was born. The one I'd rebuilt the engine on in my 20s. The one my wife had ridden home in on our second date. Disappeared around the corner of Cedar Hollow Drive at 12 m an hour. Karen watched it go like she was watching a parade. "Have a nice morning, Mr. Hale." She crossed back to her white sedan, parked illegally across 2 visitor spots. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She thought she'd won. She thought she was the one with the leverage. She thought the truck that had just hauled my father's Bronco off my property was hers to command, and she'd be calling it again on Tuesday and Friday and the Tuesday after that until I either paid her or moved. I stood on my porch a minute after her tail lights vanished. The coffee had gone cold. The orange notice flapped on the Tahoe's hood, anchored by my own landscaping rock. The Petersons' blinds were still closed. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler kicked on. I walked inside, set the coffee in the sink, and opened the drawer in my office where I keep the things I don't want my wife to worry about. The Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association's exclusive towing vendor contract sat on top. 28 months old. Signed in blue ink on the top line by Karen Marsh, board president. Signed in black ink on the bottom line by the authorized signatory of Ridgeline Holdings LLC, the parent company I had founded 22 years ago. The company I had built from a single tow truck and a phone in my garage to the largest licensed recovery operation in 3 counties. The company whose name was painted on the door of every truck Karen had ever called. She had signed a contract with me. She had never read the name on the line above hers. I picked up the phone and called Mike. He answered on the first ring. "Boss, I'm so sorry, I tried to, Mike, it's fine. Don't apologize. I need you to do exactly what she tells you for the next 2 weeks. Every call, every tow. Document everything, body cam on. Dispatch logs clean, a pause, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Then I'm coming in." I hung up. She had no idea the truck hauling my Bronco away had my name on its title. And so did every other truck she'd been calling for the last 2 years. I was about to let her keep digging. I bought the house in Cedar Hollow for the quiet. That sounds like the setup of a joke now. It wasn't at the time. I was 45 years old. I had spent 22 years building ridgeline towing and recovery from a single flatbed and a landline in my garage into a 42-truck operation serving 3 counties, interstate corridors, sheriff's contracts, 6 municipal departments, and 104 homeowners associations across the region. Cedar Hollow was one of those 104. I didn't know that when I made the offer. The contracts didn't run through my name. They ran through Ridgeline Holdings LLC, the parent company I'd set up in my late 30s on an accountant's advice. Every Ridgeline contract for the last decade had been signed by Theodore Reyes, my accountant, as authorized signatory. My name appeared on exactly one document inside that company, and that document lived in a safe deposit box. Nobody outside Theodore and my wife knew I owned it. After a bad incident at a tow scene years back, I'd gone quiet on purpose. The truck said Ridgeline. The paperwork said Ridgeline Holdings. The man who owned it didn't say anything. My wife Diane and I closed on a Tuesday in February. Craftsman on a third of an acre, deep driveway, garage big enough for the Bronco and the work van side by side. The HOA disclosure packet was the size of a phone book. I read all 82 pages on the porch the first night with a beer. Marked 4 sections with sticky notes. Didn't think I'd need to come back to those notes for years. Karen Marsh knocked on our door 52 hours after we got the keys. She introduced herself as the board president, 5 terms running unopposed, and handed Diane a second welcome packet. Separate from the one we'd gotten at closing. This one hand, assembled with a plastic comb binding. She corrected Diane's name on the intake form twice before Diane finished spelling it. On her way down the walkway, she measured our trash cans at the curb. I watched her do it from the front window. She had a tape measure clipped to her belt like a contractor. That woman, Diane said when she came back inside, is going to be a problem. She's an HOA president, I said. That's the job description. I underestimated her. I'll own that. The first violation arrived 11 days later, taped to the mailbox post in a clear plastic sleeve. Mulch color. Cedar Hollow had an approved pallet, 3 browns, 1 red. And I'd put down something called espresso that the board had retroactively classified as off-pallet, $65. I paid it. The second came a week later. Garage door opened longer than 15 minutes during daylight. I'd been changing oil on Diane's sedan, $85. I paid it. The third was a wreath I'd left up 6 days past January 1st, which the bylaws permitted, but a November amendment never circulated, buried in a meeting minute. Had quietly moved the deadline to December 31st, $100. I paid it by April. I had paid 11 violations totaling just under $1,000. Mulch garage wreath, trash can placement, visible hose, bird feeder height, a second mulch infraction, mailbox flag angle, a ceramic frog Diane's sister gave her, deemed non-conforming, driveway oil stain that predated our ownership by 3 years, and the Bronco parked facing the wrong direction in my own driveway. That was the one that made me set down my coffee and read the bylaw twice. There was no direction clause for driveway parking. Karen had cited Section 12.4b, which governs street parking, and applied it to a private driveway, which was governed by Section 12.6, which had no direction requirement at all. I paid that one with a smile because by then I'd started a file. The file lived in a yellow folder in the desk drawer in my office, hand-labeled Cedar Hollow Marsh. Inside, every violation notice scanned and dated. Every check stub photographed front and back. Every email Karen sent me from the board's address. Every email she sent from her personal address when she was angry and forgot to switch. Photographs of each alleged violation taken the day the notice arrived. Timestamp printouts of the relevant bylaw sections with the actual language highlighted in yellow. And one document Karen would have given anything to know was in there. A copy of the exclusive towing vendor contract between Cedar Hollow HOA and Ridgeline Towing and Recovery, executed 28 months before I moved in. Signed on the top line in blue ink by Karen Marsh, board president. Signed on the bottom line in black ink by Theodore Reyes on behalf of Ridgeline Holdings LLC. My name was nowhere on the document. That was why Karen had never connected it. The vendor she called every time someone parked wrong on Cedar Hollow Drive had been signed into existence by a man she'd never met on behalf of a holding company she'd never researched, run by an owner whose name had never once been printed on anything she'd ever held in her hand. I had thought about telling her in those first months. The way you think about telling a telemarketer they've reached the wrong number briefly without follow-through. 22 years in the towing business had taught me a pattern about people like Karen. They didn't stop when you told them they were wrong. They escalated. They escalated until they hit something they couldn't move. And then they collapsed all at once. The collapse was always proportional to how far they'd climbed. Karen at that point had climbed to about $900 and a ceramic frog. She had a lot more climbing to do before the collapse would mean anything, so I paid and I filed and I watched. Diane noticed. Diane noticed everything. She came into my office one Saturday in May, set a cup of coffee on the desk, looked at the yellow folder and said, "How long are you going to let her do this? As long as she keeps doing it." Why? Because she's going to keep going. And every time she goes further, the file gets thicker. And when she finally does something she can't walk back, the file is going to be too thick for any lawyer in the state to defend her against. Diane looked at the folder, then at me. "Just don't let it cost us the house, it won't." I'm in that. I also knew sitting there in May with a folder 1 in thick and a Bronco still in my driveway that Karen had not yet done the thing that would make the folder matter. 11 violations were nuisance money. None of it crossed a line that wasn't recoverable. I needed her to cross a line. She started crossing it in the fall. The fine stopped being parking and trash. They started being driveway sweeps. She'd filed 3 violations in a single afternoon. Diane's sedan obstructing visibility. The Tahoe exceeding curb projection. My work van displaying commercial signage because it had a Ridgeline magnetic placard I'd forgotten to peel off. The fines climbed past 400. The language in her notices started using words like willful and repeat offender and board considering escalated enforcement. I knew what escalated enforcement meant. I had a contract on file that told me exactly what it meant. The folder got thicker. I added every notice. I added the bylaw section she was reciting each time, highlighted in yellow. I added a tab divider because the folder was now organized enough to need one. And one Tuesday morning in late winter, 8 months after we'd moved in, I walked out my front door with a cup of coffee and found a Ridgeline tow truck in my drive, a yellow strap around the axle of my father's Bronco, and Karen Marsh photographing my license plate. That was when the file stopped being a file and started being a weapon. I built Ridgeline 22 years ago. Karen signed the contract with us herself. She just never read the name on the line above hers. 1 week after the Bronco, I drove out to my own yard to pay for it. I'd taken Diane's sedan. I'd left the Tahoe in the driveway with Karen's orange notice still on the hood and the river rock still anchoring it down. I wanted them there when she drove past on her morning loop, which she did every weekday at 8:14 a.m. A pattern I had logged in the yellow folder 7 separate times. The Ridgeline yard sat off a county service road 22 mi from Cedar Hollow behind a chain-link fence with a sliding gate. I parked in the customer lot, walked through the front door like a stranger, and waited my turn behind a woman whose car had been towed from a grocery store parking lot. The clerk on duty was Sarah, who'd started 6 months earlier and had never once seen me come through the front. She processed the woman's release, then looked up at me with the practiced sympathy of someone who deals with angry customers all day. Name on the vehicle: Hail Bronco. Picked up Saturday from Cedar Hollow, she typed. Her face changed. I watched it change. She read the screen twice, glanced at the back office door, and looked up at me with a different expression than the one she'd started with. "One moment, sir. It's fine, Sarah," I said. "Just process it. 640, right?" "Yes, sir." She paused. "Cash or card?" "Cash." I counted $600 bills and 220s onto the counter. She gave me the receipt. I folded it, put it in my breast pocket, and walked through the customer door into the lot where Mike was waiting beside the Bronco with the keys in his hand. He'd parked it himself. He'd parked it where I always parked my personal vehicles when they came through the yard under the awning away from the impound row where the morning sun wouldn't hit the paint. He buffed out the strap scuff on the axle. He hadn't been able to fix the scratch on the front bumper, but he'd photographed it from 4 angles and printed the photos on company letterhead timestamped with the hook, driver's name, and the work order number. For your file, he said. Thanks, Mike. Bah. About Saturday. I want you to know I know don't, he nodded. How many of these have you run for her? I asked. In the neighborhood last 2 years. He thought about it. I'd guess north of 100. Most of us have flagged them. I've got a folder in dispatch. Keep flagging them. Keep the folder. I'm going to need it. I drove the Bronco home with the windows down. The release receipt sat in my breast pocket the whole way, $640. I had just paid my own company to release my own vehicle from an impound my own contract permitted. That receipt would later sit in a binder on a podium in a clubhouse meeting room. But at that moment it sat against my chest, warm from my body, and it felt the way a folded knife feels in a pocket. The compliance meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I hadn't asked for it, Karen had. The letter had arrived on my doorstep 2 days after the Bronco was released, hand-delivered in a Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association envelope with her name typed in the upper corner and the words Mandatory Compliance Conference in bold across the top. The letter informed me that the board had voted to require an in-person meeting at my residence on Thursday at 6 p.m., at which time I would be presented with a full accounting of accumulated violations and remediation options. The letter was signed by Karen alone. There was no record of any board vote in the meeting minutes, which I checked the same afternoon because the bylaws required meeting minutes to be posted within 48 hours of any board action. And I had access to the portal as a homeowner in good standing, which despite 11 paid fines, I technically still was. Thursday at 5:58 p.m. 3 people stepped onto my porch. Karen in her bright hot pink blazer suit, a gold necklace bright above her clipboard. Greg Howrin, board treasurer, a retired insurance adjuster who had lived in Cedar Hollow since the development opened in 1998. In a third person, I hadn't expected Tyler Marsh, Karen's 26-year-old son, in a navy polo that was a shade lighter than his mother's and had no embroidered HOA logo on the chest because he held no position on the board. He was wearing it anyway. He had a manila folder under his arm and a posture that suggested he'd watched a lot of reality television featuring repo agents. I opened the door. I didn't invite them in. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. My phone was in my shirt pocket. Audio recording. Voice memo app open. Screen dark. We were in a single-party consent state. I didn't need anyone's permission but my own. Mr. Hale, Karen said, thank you for accommodating us. I didn't accommodate anything. I said, you announced you'd be here. There's a difference. She let that go. She opened her clipboard. The board has reviewed your file and has voted to assess a cumulative penalty of $2,400 with a lien to be filed against the property within 30 days unless paid in full. Additionally, the board has authorized an expanded enforcement protocol which will include increased monitoring and immediate removal of any non-compliant vehicles from this residence going forward. She read it like a sentence. Greg looked at his shoes. Tyler smirked. The smirk was the part I logged most carefully. It was the same smirk I'd seen on 100 faces over the years. The smirk of a person who is enjoying someone else's powerlessness and does not realize the room can shift. What board? I said, excuse me, what board voted? On what dates? At what meetings? Posted in which minutes? She blinked. The board has the authority to. That's not what I asked Karen. I asked when the vote happened. I checked the minutes this morning. There's no record of any vote on a compliance penalty against my address. There's no record of a vote authorizing expanded enforcement. There's no record of a meeting on the date this letter claims it was issued. So, I'm asking what board? Greg's eyes came up off his shoes for the first time. He looked at Karen. He looked at Tyler. He looked back at his shoes. Karen pivoted. The board has standing authority under Section 14 to assess penalties in cases of repeated noncompliance. Section 14.2 requires a notice vote. Section 14.3 requires the homeowner to be served the meeting notice 48 hours in advance. Section 14.4 requires the vote to be recorded in minutes posted within 48 hours of the action. None of those things happened, so I'll ask one more time, slow wet board. Tyler stepped forward. He pointed at my chest with a manila folder. You don't talk to my mother like that. I looked at the folder. I looked at his hand. I looked at his face. You're not on the board, I said. You have no role here. Step back off my porch, he didn't, Tyler. Greg said quietly, step back. Tyler stepped back. Karen's neck flushed. Mr. Hale, she said. You are being uncooperative, and I want to be very clear. We have the authority to file a lien on this property within 30 days, and we will. We have done it before. Mrs. Albright on Juniper. 2-time foreclosure proceeding initiated. The Andersons on Magnolia. 18 months of garnished assessments. You can ask anyone. You will lose this house if you keep this up. She just named 2 more victims on my recording. Mrs. Albright and the Andersons. I would visit both within the week. You sure you want to put that lien on paper, Karen? It was the first full sentence I'd said to her in 8 months. That wasn't a polite acknowledgement. She heard the tone. She misread it. She mistook calm for fear. Watch me, she said. I looked at her for a long beat. I looked at Greg, who was no longer looking at his shoes. He was looking at me. And there was something in his face that wasn't quite recognition, but was close to it. Greg had been a claims adjuster for 40 years. Greg knew the difference between a homeowner who was scared and a homeowner who was waiting. I picked my phone up off the porch railing. I'd set it there when I stepped outside, deliberately in their line of sight, and slid it into my pocket. Karen's eyes followed it. 2 steps after me she took. When I turned toward the door, she caught herself before she crossed the threshold. She did not quite trespass. She came within an inch. I stepped inside. I left the door open. Down at the corner of the cul-de-sac, parked in the shadow of a maple tree, a Ridgeline tow truck idled with its lights off. Mike was in the driver's seat with a clipboard on his knee, logging the time, the address, and the names of the 3 people on my porch. He had been parked there since 5:45 p.m. He would be parked there until 6:30 p.m. I had asked him to come. He had asked no questions. He had brought his body cam. I closed the door. Through the front window, I watched Karen turn to Greg and gesture sharply. Watched Greg shrug and walk back toward his Buick without looking at her. Watched Tyler stand uselessly on my porch for another 15 seconds before he followed his mother to her sedan. Karen sat in the driver's seat for almost a minute before she pulled away. She was on the phone. I could see her mouth moving through the windshield. I would later learn from a dispatch log timestamp that she was calling Ridgeline to inquire about scheduling availability for the following Tuesday at 6:00 a.m. She told me she could take the house. I told her I'd already taken something of hers. She just hadn't noticed yet. Eleanor Mosby knocked on my door at 9:17 the next morning. She was 76 years old, 4'11", and carrying a green canvas tote bag with both hands like it weighed more than she did. I'd seen her at the mailboxes a few times. We'd nodded. We had never spoken. She lost her husband Frank 3 years before, according to the obituary I'd skimmed in the community newsletter. And she lived alone in the white colonial 3 doors down. Mr. Hale, she said. I saw what she did to you on Saturday. I came to apologize. You don't owe me an apology, Mrs. Mosby, Eleanor, and yes, I do. I watched from my front window. I didn't come outside. None of us did. We never do. She held up the tote bag. I brought you something. May I come in for a few minutes? I held the door open. Diane made coffee. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table and unloaded the tote bag onto the wood. Item by item. The way someone empties a purse looking for car keys. Except what came out of Eleanor's bag wasn't car keys. It was a 3-ring binder 2 and thick, organized with color-coded tabs, a stack of canceled checks held together with a binder clip, a manila envelope of photographs, a pocket calendar with circles drawn around dates in red pen. My husband and I moved into Cedar Hollow in 2004, she said. Frank died in October of 21. I keep records because Frank kept records. He was a Navy supply officer. He wrote everything down. She opened the binder to the first tab. These are every fine Karen has issued me since Frank passed, 41 of them. Total assessed $6,200. Total paid $4,400. She looked up. I stopped paying 8 months ago when I couldn't afford the prescription anymore. I looked at the binder. I didn't reach for it. Diane set a coffee in front of Eleanor and stayed standing by the counter. 3 of those fines were issued the week of Frank's funeral. Eleanor said. One was a parking violation for the hearse. I paid that one because I didn't have the strength to fight it. I let that sit a moment, Eleanor, I said. How many tows? She turned to the second tab. 14, she said. From my own driveway, 18 months. Total and release fees. $9,240. She slid a photograph across the table. It was her old sedan up on a Ridgeline flatbed taken from her front window. The date stamped in the corner of the print. I don't drive much anymore. The car is mostly to get to the doctor and the pharmacy. Every time Karen sees it parked the wrong way or for more than 3 days without moving, she calls. I looked at the photograph. I recognized the truck. I recognized the driver, Doril, a 6-year employee, one of my best. Mrs. Mosby, I said, Eleanor, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Did anyone on the board ever explain the legal process to you? The required notice period before any tow? Karen told me the board could do whatever it wanted. I believed her. I'm 76, Mr. Hale. I didn't go look it up. Were you ever served a 48-hour written notice before a tow? No. Did Karen ever phone you directly in advance to tell you a vehicle would be removed? Never. They were always already gone when I came outside. I nodded. I kept my face still, inside. In a part of me that I'd been holding very steady for 8 months, something shifted load-bearing weight onto a different beam. Every single one of those 14 tows had been illegal under Cedar Hollow's own bylaws. Section 18.3 required a written 48-hour notice posted on the vehicle and mailed to the registered owner before any HOA initiated tow. Section 18.44 required attempted direct contact with the homeowner. Section 18.5 required board minutes documenting the authorization posted within 48 hours of the action. None of those things had happened, not once for 3 years. And every single one of those 14 tows had been performed by my drivers. Logged in my dispatch system, paid for in cash and credit card at my counter. I had been the unwitting instrument of $9,240 in theft from a widow. Eleanor, I said, I'd like to keep this binder for a few days. I'll make you copies of everything and return the originals. Is that all right? She slid it across the table. There's more, she said. If you want to know about it, there was more. Over the next 2 days, Eleanor brought 4 more neighbors to my kitchen, one at a time, each one with a story she'd vouched for and a stack of documents to back it up. The Patels, Anjali and Devon, mid-30s, expecting their first child. Their Subaru had been towed from their own driveway at 11:40 p.m. on the night Annalie went into labor. Devon had been timing contractions when the truck pulled up. He'd run outside in pajama pants and begged the driver to wait. The driver had not been allowed to wait. Annalie had given birth in the back of a ride-share. The fine had been issued the next morning for obstruction of emergency lane access even though there was no emergency. Lane and the Subaru had been parked entirely on private concrete. Marcus Webb, 51, a Marine veteran tutor, ran his own HVAC business out of his garage. His service truck had been towed twice in 6 months for ornamental violations. The small American flag decal on the back window and the company logo on the side panel, both of which were explicitly permitted under Section 9 of the bylaws. Total and release fees $1,820. He'd lost a job on the second tow because he couldn't get to the site. Roberto Diaz, 38, single father, 2 kids. Tow at 4:47 a.m., the morning of a job interview he'd waited 4 months for. He'd had to call out. He had not gotten a call back. Mrs. Calloway, the retired school teacher whose blinds had been closed during the Bronco tow. Her grandkids' cars got tagged within 20 minutes of arriving at her driveway. She'd been written up 9 times in 2 years for unauthorized guest vehicles, even though Section 11 explicitly permitted family visitors for up to 72 hours. I made copies of every binder. I gave the originals back. I sat in my office that Saturday night with 5 new folders on my desk and 1 yellow folder of my own. And I opened my laptop and I logged into the back end of Ridgeline's dispatch system, the one I had built, the one whose admin credentials had never been issued to anyone but me and Theodore. I pulled every tow order ever placed in Cedar Hollow zip code by an authorizing party with the surname Marsh, going back to the date Karen had signed the contract. The system returned 147 orders. I sorted them by driver flag status. My drivers had a quiet protocol I'd built into the system years ago. A single check box at the bottom of every work order labeled off questionable. It didn't refuse the tow. It logged a concern. Drivers checked it when they pulled up to a job and something didn't look right. A vehicle clearly on private property, a homeowner present, and objecting, an absence of the required posted notice. Of the 147 Cedar Hollow tow orders signed by Karen Marsh, 83 were checked. I sat there with the screen open for a long time. Mike had been flagging her tows for over a year. So had Darryl. So had 3 other drivers. They had not refused the calls. Refusing would have voided the contract. They had done their jobs and they had quietly noted in a field I had built into the system for exactly this purpose that something was wrong. They had been waiting for somebody upstairs to look at the field. I had not been looking. I had been letting the company run itself while I lived in Cedar Hollow trying to be quiet. That was the moment sitting in my office at 11:40 on a Saturday night with the laptop screen glowing and Diane already asleep upstairs that I stopped thinking of this as Karen's problem and started thinking of it as mine. Not because she towed my Bronco, because for 3 years she had used my company to extract close to $40,000 from people who couldn't fight back. And my company, my system, my drivers, my logs had been silently documenting every cent of it while I paid mulch fines and filed yellow folders and waited for her to cross a line. She had crossed the line 18 months ago with Aliner's first tow. I just hadn't been looking. I downloaded the dispatch logs, all of them. I exported the body cam footage from Mike's last 6 months of Cedar Hollow calls. I pulled the contract, the bylaws, the meeting minutes I had access to, and every email Karen had ever sent me. I printed 2 binders. One for an attorney named Patricia Lynn, who specialized in HOA civil litigation and had done work for Ridgeline in the past. One for the civil division of the county sheriff's office, where I knew the lead deputy because his department had a vehicle recovery contract with us. I called Alina the next morning before her coffee was cold. "Don't pay the next fine," I said. "Don't move your car. Just call me when she comes, that's it, that's it." "You're not going to tell me what you're doing?" "Not yet, Mr. Hale," she said. "Are you going to be all right?" "I'm going to be fine, Alina, so are you." She was quiet a moment. "All right," she said. "I trust you." I hung up. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and looked out at the cul-de-sac. The Tahoe was still in the driveway with the orange notice on the hood. The River Rock was still anchoring it. The Bronco was parked behind it, the strap scuff buffed out, the bumper scratch documented on letterhead in the yellow folder upstairs. Aliner's binder sat next to my keys. I had not yet told her who I was. I would not tell her until the night it mattered. But for the first time since Karen had knocked on my door 52 hours after we moved in. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly how it was going to end. And I knew the file was finally thick enough that no lawyer in the state would be able to defend her against it. I just needed her to do one more stupid thing. She would. She would within 48 hours. Karen filed the lien on a Friday at 6:51 a.m. I knew because I'd had an alert set on Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association VA since the Tuesday porch conversation. The notification hit my phone at 7:04 while I was pouring coffee. $11,400. Cumulative violations and administrative fees. Notarized at a UPS store on Route 9 the previous evening. She had also taped a printed copy to my front door before dawn. The tape was painter's blue. There was a coffee ring on the corner. I photographed it from 3 angles and left it where it was. At 7:12, the first Ridgeline truck turned onto Cedar Hollow Drive. I heard it before I saw it. 22 years of running tow trucks teaches you to hear a flatbed downshift from 2 blocks away, a 650. Siri pulled up to my curb. A second truck pulled in behind it. Then a third, then a fourth. Karen got out of her white sedan at the corner. She had brought 4 trucks. She had scheduled my company's entire morning capacity to strip my driveway in a single coordinated sweep. And she'd set up a phone on a tripod on the curb of her own house to film it for the Cedar Hollow Facebook page. Diane came down the stairs in her robe. "Don't," I said. I wasn't going to. She stood next to me. The first truck was hooking up the Tahoe. Karen was photographing the orange notice still on the hood, still anchored by the River Rock like it was citation in active enforcement. The second truck angled for the sedan. The third lined up at the work van. The fourth waited for the Bronco. Diane was quiet a long moment. Tom the van. I knew what she meant. My father's Craftsman rolling chest was in the work van, every drawer labeled in his handwriting, every wrench and foam he'd cut himself. It had been in the van since the day of his funeral 7 years ago because I had not yet been able to move it into the garage. And in the rear compartment, under a folded mover's blanket, was a wrapped box Diane had hidden 3 days earlier because she'd run out of places to put it where I wouldn't find it. Before our anniversary. Our anniversary was Sunday, Tom. I know Diane. She didn't cry. She put her hand on the small of my back the way she had at my father's graveside 7 years before. And her breath did the small catch I'd heard exactly twice in 19 years of marriage. Once at the cemetery, once now. That was the only moment in 8 months that I almost stopped being patient. I almost walked out the front door. I almost crossed the lawn and put my hand on the side of the truck and told my own driver to set it down. I didn't. I steadied. I took a breath and I steadied and I let it happen. Karen walked into the middle of the cul-de-sac with her phone in her hand. She was on a call. She put the call on speaker deliberately, theatrically, loud enough to carry to my porch and to Mrs. Calloway's open window, and she said into the phone, I need you to tow anything on this street with that man's name on it. I don't care about plates. I don't care about cross-referencing. I own this contract. Tow them all. The dispatcher on the other end was a young woman named Priya. She had worked for me 11 months. She was good at her job. She was also per protocol I had personally written into the dispatch handbook in 2014, recording every authorization call placed by a Cedar Hollow account holder. Karen had just put on the official Ridgeline record in her own voice, a sentence I would later have transcribed and printed in 36-point font on a single page in a binder. I own this contract. She hung up. She turned smiling toward my front window. Diane went upstairs. The Bronco came off the driveway last. Mike was on the hook. He was wearing his body cam, very visibly. He had angled it so anyone looking at his shoulder would see the small black camera pointed forward, and he had clipped a second one to his belt for redundancy. He worked slowly. He did not look at Karen. He did not look at my house. Hook strapped, double-checked the strapped, drove away at 12 mph. Within 40 minutes, my driveway was empty. The orange notice lay flat where the Tahoe had been parked, the river rock still on top of it. The lien notice was still taped to my door. Karen folded her tripod, got into her sedan, and drove off toward the clubhouse. I went upstairs. Diane was sitting on the edge of the bed. It's just stuff, she said. I know it's just stuff. It's not just stuff, the tools. I'll get them back. All of them today, tonight at the latest, and the and that. She looked at me. She had not asked me in 8 months what was in the yellow folder. She had not asked me in 19 years what was on the bottom line of a single Argellane contract. She had let me have my quiet. Tom, is it time? It's time, she nodded. She did not ask what time meant. She walked past me into the bathroom and closed the door. The shower started a moment later. I went downstairs and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Patricia Lynn, my attorney. I told her the lien had been filed and the sweep had happened. I told her what Karen had said on speaker. I told her I had it recorded through dispatch. Patricia said one word, good, and then said she'd have the lien discharge motion ready by Monday. The second was to the County Sheriff's Civil Division. I asked for Deputy Andrew Reyes, a man I'd known for years through Ridgeline contracts. I told him there was an HOA meeting Tuesday night. I told him I needed a plainclothes presence at the back of the room. He said he'd be there himself. The third was to Mike, Boss Mike. Stop accepting Cedar Hollow tow orders. Effective immediately. Pull every body cam, every dispatch recording, every work order from the last 28 months. Have it on my desk by Sunday afternoon. I'm coming in Monday. A long pause. Mike, yeah boss, I'm here. I'm just, he cleared his throat. About time boss, I know. One more thing. Tuesday at 6:00 p.m. the Cedar Hollow Clubhouse. Wear the uniform. Walk in through the back door at 6:15. Don't say anything. Just stand there. Yes boss. I hung up. I walked back to the office. The yellow folder sat on the desk, 3 in thick now, with tabs and dividers and a typed index on the first page. I added the morning's entries, the lien timestamp, the door photos, the dispatch metadata, Priya's protocol activation log, the 4 new work order numbers. She just stolen everything I drove. By Monday, I'd own everything she stood on. Tuesday night at 6:00, the Cedar Hollow Clubhouse was full. I had not seen the clubhouse full in the 8 months I'd lived in the neighborhood. The HOA meeting room sat 60 people in folding chairs and another 15 along the back wall. And that night, there were people standing in the doorway and out into the foyer. Word had moved through Cedar Hollow the way word moves through any small community when something the neighbors have been swallowing for years finally finds a throat to come up through. Eleanor had made phone calls. Marcus Webb had texted his block, Mrs. Calloway had spoken to her bridge group. By Tuesday afternoon, the agenda for the monthly board meeting had grown 3 new public comment requests, all from people who had never spoken at a Cedar Hollow meeting before. I walked in at 5:58 and took a seat in the 3rd row on the aisle. Eleanor was already in the front row. Marcus Webb sat behind her in a clean polo shirt with his arms folded. Annalie Patel sat next to her husband, her newborn asleep in a carrier at her feet. Roberto Diaz stood against the side wall in his work clothes. He had come straight from a job. Patricia Lynn sat 2 rows behind me in a charcoal suit with a slim leather portfolio on her lap and an expression that suggested she was already enjoying herself. Deputy Andrew Reyes stood at the back of the room in jeans and a flannel shirt. He looked like someone's nephew waiting for a meeting to end. The only thing that gave him away was the way he stood feet square, weight balanced, hands clasped in front of him in the precise resting posture of a person who had spent 30 years in uniform. Karen took the gavel at 6:02. She wore her bright hot pink blazer suit, gold necklace, and a small American flag pin and an expression of unbothered competence. Greg Howerin sat to her left looking at his notes. 2 other board members I didn't know sat to her right. Tyler stood at the side aisle in his unofficial polo, arms crossed, doing his best impression of a bouncer. Karen opened with a victory lap. Good evening, neighbors. Thank you for the strong turnout. Before we get to public comment, I'd like to update the community on several enforcement actions the board has taken this week to restore the standards that make Cedar Hollow a desirable place to live. She listed the lien against my property by case number. She listed the morning sweep at my address by date and time. She did not use my name. She did not need to. Every person in the room knew. I felt 36 heads turn very slightly toward the 3rd row and very slightly away again. Furthermore, Karen said the board will be voting tonight on a motion to expand our existing exclusive towing vendor authority. The motion will permit board-authorized removal of any vehicle on association property without prior written notice to the homeowner, effective immediately upon passage. This is a long overdue procedural update that will allow the board to act decisively when residents become uncooperative. She set the printed motion on the table in front of her. She looked at the room. She was smiling. I have replayed that smile many times since. She was not smiling at anyone in particular. She was smiling at the idea that on the night the entire neighborhood had filled her clubhouse to push back against her, she was about to pass a motion making it easier for her to do everything she had ever done to them. And there was nothing they could do about it because she controlled the gavel and the agenda and the only towing company within 30 mi that she had ever bothered to call. She did not know that I was sitting 3 rows back. She had seen me. She had looked directly at me when I sat down. She had looked at the man in the 3rd row in the worn flannel shirt and the work boots. The man who had been paying her fines for 8 months without complaint. The man whose driveway she had emptied 4 days earlier, and she had registered him as the defeated party in the room. She had not registered him as a threat. The motion went on the table. Karen opened public comment. Eleanor stood first. She walked to the small podium in front of the board table with her green canvas tote bag in one hand and a single sheet of paper in the other. She set the paper on the podium. She did not look at the paper. My name is Eleanor Mosby, she said. I live at 412 Cedar Hollow Drive, my husband Frank, and I moved into this neighborhood in 2004. Frank died in October of 2021. Since then, this board has issued me 41 violations totaling $6,200. This board has towed my car from my own driveway 14 times. I have paid this board $9,240 in tow fees in the last 18 months. I am 76 years old. I am here tonight because I am not going to pay another dollar, and I am not going to be quiet anymore, and I would like the minutes to reflect that I am asking this board to resign. She stepped back from the podium. The room was silent. Karen into her microphone smooth. Mrs. Mosby, you're out of order. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes and to items on tonight's agenda. Excuse me. Eleanor said. I am on the agenda. I requested time this afternoon. Item 7B. Karen looked at her agenda. Karen looked at Greg. Greg looked at his shoes. Mrs. Mosby, Karen said, will address your concerns under new business. My concerns are addressed now, Eleanor said. I have nothing further to add. She walked back to her seat. Marcus Webb stood next. He went to the podium and gave his name and his address and the dates of his 2 illegal tow incidents and the dollar amount he had paid in release fees and the fact that he was a 2-tour Marine and that the second tow had cost him a contract. He spoke for 90 seconds. He sat down. Annalie Patel stood next holding her newborn. She did not speak long. She said her son's name. She said the date he was born. She said the time her car had been towed that night. She sat down. Karen 3 times said out of order. 3 times the speakers did not stop. Tyler stepped halfway forward from the side aisle on the second instance. The way a man steps forward when he is about to do something, and Deputy Reyes shifted his weight at the back of the room. One small deliberate shift and Tyler stopped. He did not see the deputy. He felt the room. Roberto Diaz stood and said only one sentence. I missed a job interview because this board towed my car. He sat down. Karen attempted to close public comment. 3 more hands went up. She closed it anyway. The board, she said, will now move to vote on motion 14B. The expansion of vendor authority I described earlier. I stood up. I walked to the podium. I had brought one thing with me. A plain unmarked black binder 3 in thick. No label on the cover. No tab visible from the outside. I set it on the podium. I did not open it. I rested both hands on top of it and looked at Karen Marsh and said nothing. The room had gone quiet again, but it was a different quiet than the one that had followed Eleanor. Eleanor's quiet had been outrage. This quiet was attention. The room had registered that I had not signed up to speak. The room had registered that I had walked up to the podium anyway. The room had registered that I had not said a word for 30 seconds. Karen waited. Then she leaned into her microphone, polite, public half-facing, the smile back in place. Sir, she said. Please identify yourself for the record. She thought she was winning. She thought she was offering a defeated man a public stage to embarrass himself on. She thought perhaps that she would let me speak for 2 minutes, gavel me down, and move directly to the vote that would make her morning sweep retroactively legitimate. At the back of the room, the rear door opened. Mike walked in. He was wearing his full resign uniform, navy work shirt, name patch on the chest, company logo on the sleeve. He walked across the back wall and stood next to Deputy Reyes. Hands behind his back, eyes on the front of the room. Karen saw him. I watched her see him. I watched her eyes register the logo on the sleeve. The same logo that had been on the door of every truck she had called for 28 months. The same logo that had been on the 4 trucks that had emptied my driveway 4 days earlier. And I watched her face do a small thing, not panic, not yet, a flicker. The flicker of a person who has noticed an inconsistency she cannot immediately place. She covered it, sir. She repeated into the microphone. Less polite now. Identify yourself for the record. I had waited 8 months for her to ask me that question in a room full of witnesses. I was not going to waste it. I leaned into the podium microphone. I let the silence run 1 more beat. I'll save us both some time, I said. My name is Thomas Hale, I said. That's it. I did not look at Karen. I looked at the back wall of the room and let the room have my name in the air for a beat before I went on. I live at 48 Cedar Hollow Drive. My driveway was emptied by 4 tow trucks Friday morning at the direction of this board's president. I have been the subject of 47 violation notices and 1 lien filing in the 8 months since my wife and I moved into this neighborhood. I opened the binder for the first time slowly to the page I had tabbed and read the sole owner of Ridgeline Holdings LLC, parent company of Ridgeline Towing and Recovery, the exclusive towing vendor under contract with this homeowners association. I lifted the executed contract from the binder and slid it across the table to the secretary. Then I turned to the projector card at the side of the room where I had asked Beverly Cho quietly. At 6:15, when I arrived to load 2 documents onto the system, I nodded at her. She tapped a key. The screen behind the dais came alive with 2 images side by side. On the left, the Cedar Hollow Ridgeline contract, 28 months old, blown up to 6 FT tall. Karen Marsh's signature in blue ink on the top line. Theodore Ray's authorized signatory Ridgeline Holdings, LLC, in black ink on the bottom. On the right, the Ridgeline Holdings, LLC operating agreement, page 3. The ownership schedule. A single name in the sole member column, Thomas A. Hale, 100%. I gave the room 10 seconds to look at both. I did not point. I did not narrate. The pairing did its own work. The signature line on the left and the ownership line on the right were the same shape and weight as a math problem with the answer written next to it. The room did not erupt. It went silent in a different register than before. Elinor's silence had been outrage. The podium pause had been attention. This was the silence of 70-something people simultaneously running the same arithmetic in their heads. Elinor was the first to laugh, short, almost a cough, one syllable. Marcus Webb made a low sound that was not quite a laugh. A man two rows behind me said, "Oh my God," under his breath, audible to everyone within 4 chairs. Annalie Patel's hand went to her mouth. Roberto Diaz lowered his head against the side wall and pressed his palm to his forehead and started shaking, and I could not tell from where I was standing whether he was laughing or crying. Karen's mouth opened, it closed. It opened again. No sound came out. Tyler sat down hard. Greg Howran was already moving. He had picked up the printed motion for Section 14B. The expansion of vendor authority. Karen had been seconds from calling for a vote, and he was tearing it in half at the table. Methodically, the way a man tears a check. He has decided not to write. I continued. As of 7:00 this morning, Ridgeline Towing and Recovery formally terminated its contract with this association. Notice was served by certified mail and by email to every board member at 658. As of this afternoon, the complete dispatch logs from the duration of the contract have been turned over to the Civil Division of the County Sheriff's Office and to the State Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Unit. The logs include 147 tow orders authorized by Karen Marsh as board president. 83 were flagged by our drivers at the time of the tow as having questionable authority. The audio recording of a speaker phone call placed by Mrs. Marsh to Ridgeline dispatched this past Friday morning in which she identified herself on the record as the owner of the contract she signed with my company is included in the materials. I paused. Total release fees collected on illegal tow authorizations approximately $39,400. Ridgeline will be waiving every cent of it and contributing the full amount with interest to a restitution fund, administered through Mrs. Mosby and one other neighbor of her choosing. We'll also be turning over all body cam footage, dispatch audio, and authorization records as plaintiff exhibits to the civil suit being prepared by Patricia Lynn. I gestured toward the second row. Mrs. Lynn is here tonight. Patricia raised her hand a half-inch off her portfolio. She did not stand. Karen found her voice. You have a conflict of interest. You can't sit on this association as a homeowner while owning the vendor. I have never sat on this association in any capacity, Karen. I'm a homeowner of 8 months. I've paid every fine you issued me. The conflict isn't mine. The conflict is that you've been signing illegal tow authorizations against your own neighbors for 3 years in a fiduciary role in violation of the bylaws you swore to uphold. Greg stood at the dais. Correct. I resign my seat on this board effective immediately. I'll be cooperating fully with the investigation. He picked up his folder and walked off. He paused beside Elinor's chair, said something quiet to her, and walked out the back of the room. The female board member to Karen's right stood next. I resigned as well. The man beside her did not stand. He said nothing. He sat there. Karen pivoted. Tyler, get my phone. I'm calling our attorney. Tyler half stood. He looked toward the back door where Mike still stood beside Deputy Ray's, hands behind his back. Mike said quietly without raising his voice at all. Probably want to wait, bud. Tyler sat back down. Deputy Ray stepped forward. He walked the center aisle at the pace of a man going to refill his coffee, and he stopped beside the dais. Mrs. Marsh, Deputy Andrew Rays, County Civil Division. I'd like to speak with you after the meeting adjourns. This is a civil matter. Your attorney is welcome to be present. Please remain in the building. Am I being arrested? No, ma'am. Civil matter. Please remain in the building. The room exhaled. I turned one more page. Last item, Mrs. Marsh. You filed a lien against my property this morning for $11,400. My attorney filed a motion to discharge it with the county clerk at 9:00 a.m. The hearing is Thursday. You'll receive service tomorrow. I will not be settling. I'll be seeking sanctions for a fraudulent filing. Karen had stopped trying. She was sitting at the board table with both hands flat on the surface, looking at the screen behind her at the two images side by side. She was reading the ownership schedule. I could see her eyes moving along the line that read Thomas, a Hale 100%. She looked up at me. I'll sue you for this for defamation for 4. I let myself smile then for the first time in 8 months. For the first and only time in this story. A small one. Closed mouth. Not for her benefit, for mine. You filed a lien on the wrong man's house, Karen. Sue me. I have a binder for that too. Beverly leaned into her microphone. Mr. Hale, would you like me to restart the official recording, please, Beverly? From the top. With my comments on the record, please. The recorder's red light came on. I closed the binder. I stepped down from the podium. I walked back to my chair in the third row and sat down. The room remained standing around me. Mike at the back reached up and turned off the overhead light strip he had passed on his way in out of habit. The way you do when you finish a job at the end of a shift. The projector still glowed. Karen's signature on the left. My name on the right. 6 ft tall on the wall behind a woman who was not moving. The lien was discharged on Thursday morning at 9:14 a.m. Patricia Lynn called me from the courthouse parking lot. Before the gavel had cooled. The county judge had read the motion, looked at the contract, looked at the dispatch logs, looked at Karen's attorney, who had been hired Tuesday night at 11 p.m. and had not yet been fully briefed, and had signed the discharge order from the bench. Sanctions were granted. Karen was personally liable for Patricia's filing fees. The lien was vacated. The cloud on my title was gone before lunchtime. The State Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Unit opened its file the following Monday. The civil suit Patricia had been preparing was filed 3 weeks later on behalf of 14 plaintiffs with Alina Mosby as the named lead. Discovery moved fast because Ridgeline had already produced everything Patricia needed, and the bylaws Karen had violated were posted on the association's own website. The Cedar Hollow HOA's umbrella insurance policy paid out $186,000 in restitution within 90 days. Alina got her $9,240 back, plus interest. The Patel's medical emergency tow fee was returned in full. Marcus Webb's HVAC truck repairs were covered, and the contract he had lost to the second tow was reimbursed at his documented hourly rate. Roberto Diaz got the equivalent of 3 months' wages. Mrs. Calloway got a check for the 9 guest vehicle citations going back 2 years. Frank Mosby's hearse fine $65 from the week of his funeral was returned with a handwritten note of apology from the insurance adjuster. Karen accepted a consent decree from the state attorney general 2 months after that. 10 years barred from any HOA board position in the state. $42,000 in personal liability for damages the insurance policy would not cover. No prison. No criminal charge. The Consumer Fraud Unit had reviewed the file and determined the harm was civil systemic severe and worth pursuing, but not criminal in nature, which was the correct call legally, and the only call that mattered to anyone in Cedar Hollow. She lost her position. She lost $42,000. She lost the right to do this to anyone ever again. I waived every dollar Ridgeline would have been entitled to in the settlement. The company's share went in full to the Webb family. Marcus's daughter started college that fall. I never told him the source of the scholarship fund. He had been a Marine. He would have refused it, so I let him think it came from a small foundation, which on paper it did. The Cedar Hollow board reorganized at a special meeting 4 weeks after the clubhouse night. Alina ran unopposed for president and won the seat on a voice vote. Greg Howerin was elected vice president after publicly apologizing to 7 different homeowners by name. The third board member who had not resigned at the clubhouse. The man who had stayed silent at the dais was voted off in the next regular cycle with 14 of his 15 ballots marked. Against him, motion 14B. The expansion of vendor authority Karen had been seconds from passing was killed before it ever reached the floor. In its place, the new board passed motion 14C, which required 48-hour written notice. Direct phone contact with the homeowner and a documented board vote in the minutes before any HOA-initiated tow could be authorized. It also required the towing vendor to retain body cam footage of every removal for a minimum of 3 years and to make that footage available to any homeowner on request at no cost. The leaner drafted the motion. Patricia Lynn Proof read it. The neighborhood went quiet. Not Cedar Hollow's old quiet. The quiet of people who had been afraid to speak. A different quiet. The quiet of people who had stopped looking over their shoulders. Cars parked the way cars are supposed to park wherever the owner wanted them on private property without surveillance. Wreath stayed up past Christmas. Mulch colors drifted. The ceramic frog returned to my front step where Diane's sister had always meant for it to live. Nobody noticed it. Nobody filed anything about it. Karen listed her house in the spring. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning. She moved out of state inside 4 months to a small town in Tennessee. As far as I know, she has not yet attempted to join a homeowners association. Tyler moved with her. Before they left, on the last day, Karen drove past my driveway slowly with her sedan window down. She did not stop. She did not look. She just drove past and then she was gone. And the next family that bought her house had 2 teenage sons who skateboarded in the cul-de-sac on Saturdays and waved at every neighbor they passed. Diane got her anniversary gift back the Monday after the clubhouse meeting. It had sat untouched in the Ridgeline impound office for 48 hours in the rear compartment of the work van under the same folded mover's blanket she had placed over it on Wednesday. Mike had personally walked it from the van to my truck and would not let anyone else handle it. We opened it on the Sunday after 4 days late, sitting on our driveway side patio at the small row iron table she had picked out when we moved in. It was a watch, my father's watch, restored a 1962 Hamilton he had stopped wearing when the crown fell off in 1989 and that I had carried in a drawer for 30 years. Diane had paid a horologist in Boston to restore the movement. She had hidden it in the van because the watch had been in my father's possession when I was born and she had wanted the surprise to feel as if it had come from him as much as from her. I wore it the day we sat outside. I have worn it almost every day since. On Saturday morning, 8 weeks after the clubhouse meeting, I stood in my driveway with a cup of coffee in the same worn flannel and the same work boots. In the same spot where I had stood on the morning, Karen's first tow truck pulled up to my curb. All 4 vehicles were parked behind me, the Bronco, the Tahoe, Diane's sedan, the work van. The Bronco's bumper had been buffed out by Mike personally on a Sunday afternoon free of charge against my objections. The work van's drawers had been reorganized in the way my father had originally laid them out. The orange notice from Karen's first visit hung in a small wooden frame on the wall of my office at home next to the discharge lien, also framed. The judge's signature visible on the bottom as a souvenir I would look at occasionally for the next 20 years. A Ridgeline tow truck came down Cedar Hollow Drive at 8:47 a.m. It was Mike on his way to a legitimate call. 3 neighborhoods over a sedan parked overnight in a fire lane at a strip mall. He saw me on the porch. He tapped the horn twice. He did not slow down. He kept driving and I raised my coffee mug a half-inch toward him as he passed, and the truck rolled past my house at the speed limit without stopping at anyone's driveway. And I watched it disappear around the corner of the cul-de-sac the way I had watched the Bronco disappear 9 months earlier, except this time nothing of mine was on the flatbed and no one in the cul-de-sac was watching from behind closed blinds. The Petersons' blinds, in fact, were open. Mrs. Calloway was watering her front planters. She looked up when Mike's truck passed, recognized the logo, looked at me and waved. I waved back. We had not waved in 8 months. The blinds across the cul-de-sac were also open. The Patel's newborn was in a stroller on their porch. Roberto Diaz's pickup was parked at the curb in front of his own house at whatever angle he had felt like parking it, and Roberto himself was on his front step drinking coffee and reading the paper. Marcus Webb's HVAC service truck with its small American flag decal and its company logo on the side panel was parked at the curb in front of his house, and Marcus's wife was loading a pair of bikes into the back for the kids. For the first time in 8 months, my driveway was just a driveway again. Diane came outside with her own coffee. She stood next to me on the porch. She did not say anything. We watched the cul-de-sac for a minute. A sprinkler kicked on somewhere down the block. Elinor's small dog barked once. Elinor's bringing pie at 4:00, Diane said. What kind? She didn't say. Probably whatever's on sale at the bakery. You know how she is. I know how she is. We stood there a while longer. The frog Diane's sister had given us sat on the front step in its original position, slightly off-center from the welcome mat, exactly where Diane had wanted it for 2 years. Karen thought she owned the trucks that took my cars. She forgot to ask who owned the trucks.